So the other day on Facebook, we were having a discussion, or rather, we posted a video where we were encouraging people married out of community of property to put their affairs in order. Because one of the things that we noted is that in most instances, the person who has most of the properties registered in their own name tend to forget about the fact that all of the properties are registered in their own name, and then they pass away without having things in place. This then jeopardizes the interests of the other spouse that is remaining, because they don't really have the right to inherit in a bigger chunk. So which means that they are often on an equal footing with all of the children, which then compromises their livelihood, right? Because especially when there's extramarital kids. So we're encouraging that. And then something sparked in the discussion. Someone was saying there, and not only one person, they said, why should this person who has these properties registered in their names, right, who is going to leave the spouse behind, why should that person be concerned about putting their affairs in order and also protecting the interests of the spouse that they're leaving behind? Is the purpose of getting married out of community of property not exactly that the other spouse must be deprived of getting an interest in your properties? I want us to discuss this today. Do you see the negative angle where this is coming from? This is actually how a marriage out of community of property has been perpetuated. It has been perpetuated to be this negative thing, to be this thing that people get into just so that they can be free and they can be safe if the marriage hits rock bottom or it comes to an end. But then one of the things that people don't know is that a marriage out of community of property in most instances is not entered into because of negative intentions. And I want us to talk about these positive intentions or positive reasons why people often enter into such a marriage. Listen, if you're interested, stay here. If you're new here, hi. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and a director at a law firm here in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we welcome you. Let's get into the discussion. Now, like I said, a lot of people think people who enter into a marriage out of community of property do so for negative reasons. They do so because they want to deprive the other of any benefit of the things that they've built and all of that. Well, as much as some people may think that way, but in most instances, people do so to protect their families and to also protect the interests of the other spouse. And this is exactly what I want to talk to you about. The reasons often people choose to marry out of community of property, and that is the positive reasons. Let's talk about reason number one. Number one, often people will get married out of community of property because one of the spouses is a business owner or both spouses are business owners. So why is it critical for people to make such a decision, especially when they're business owners? Or why do they consider getting married out of community of property when they are business owners or one of them is a business owner? It's simple. When I, for example, run a business, and in my course of running this business, decide to make certain decisions, my other spouse will not be required because I'm running a business which is a separate entity. Now, in me running that business, I may just enter into a debt for the business purpose, right? On behalf of the business, not for me. And it does happen that at times the service provider who's going to give you that money, that loan, or give the business that money, that loan, will say, we need you also as the business owner to stand there as surety to guarantee that if this business can't pay us back, you will pay us back. And because this is me in the course of running my business, I will not also require or go ask for permission. I don't need that. I'm running my business. I will then agree and say, okay, fine. I'll stand as surety of my business. I believe in this business. Now, say something happens and the business can't pay back the debt. What then happens? Obviously, remember, I had stood as surety. So you can rest assured if the business can't pay and the assets of the business can't pay as well, The service provider is going to look at me and say, you better start coughing up our money because that business is not paying us or is unable to pay us. And you guarantee that if that business can't pay, you'll pay us. So pay us our money. This is where the problem starts. Because if, for example, I am married in community of property, do you think the service provider is going to come after me alone, even though I had stood personally as a surety for that debt? No, they're not going to come for me alone. They're going to also come for my spouse. And they're going to also tell him that, okay, you better also cough up money because we want our money. So they will be coming after me and the spouse. So that would then negatively affect the both of us. It would negatively affect all of our assets in this marriage. Whereas if now I am married out of community of property, they can't touch my spouse. They can't touch the things that are in the name of my spouse. So they can only focus on me. And so if the things I have cannot pay for, all of this debt, unfortunately, there's nothing much that they can do. My spouse is going to be safe and secure because we are married out of community of property. Do you see why some people get married out of community of property? It's so about the second reason. And then the other reason why people will often opt to enter into a marriage out of community of property, which I would say is a positive reason, is because they don't want the other spouse to be burdened by their own responsibilities. So they want to protect the interests of the other spouse, in fact, protect the interests of the family. Now, it happens, guys, that some people will get married to their spouses and their spouses will have children already born out of wedlock, right? And their spouses will continue to maintain the children outside of the marriage because that obligation doesn't go away. Now, the downfall is that if you are married in community of property, and now let's say this spouse that has children outside of wedlock who was maintaining these kids no longer is able to do so. Let's say they lose their job or whatever happens, so they no longer have an income to pay towards that maintenance. You know what's going to happen if it's a marriage in community of property? The other spouse, if they are capable, they're going to now have to pay for that maintenance debt, right? They now will have to play the role that their spouse is meant to play because they are what? They are married in community of property. And this often doesn't affect the marriage in a positive manner. It often puts a strain on it. You can imagine this spouse now all of a sudden is not only taking care of the family, but now there's an added responsibility of a maintenance debt that was being paid for by the other spouse on their head. So this is what others don't want to happen to their spouses. And so as a result, they say, you know what, rather we do a marriage out of community of property so that if I can't pay, nobody can touch you. Nobody can come to you to say, listen, you are also equally responsible for your spouse's debt. Let's go to the third thing. And then the third reason why people would enter into such a marriage is so that the other spouse is not affected by their bad financial record or credit history. Remember, guys, when you're married in community of property, if let's say you want to buy a property, one of the first things that the bank is going to say or a financial service provider is going to say before giving you that debt is to say to you, we need the other spouse's consent and we also need their details so that we look at the both of you because you guys are one, you are joint. So we got to look at both of you, right? So you can imagine if now you are married to someone who has a really bad credit record or else they were under sequestration or they were under debt review, that person's financial history is going to have a negative effect on what you guys are looking for. And it has happened so many times where people will not get what they desire in terms of the property that they want because they're not being approved for what exactly they qualify for because of the bad financial record of the other. And so to avoid this then, others will say, you know what, let's just get married out of community of property. Then you will be able to not be affected by my bad credit record, you can then take out that loan. And in most instances, this will work out better, because there are still some people who still are in a lot of trouble financially, and that is affecting how the other spouse is being looked at, because they are one. And so to avoid this, then people will say, you know what, let's get married out of community of property. Guys, this happened a lot post-COVID. A lot of people lost businesses, and the business debts could not be paid, and the service providers went after them, and they lost a lot, and that also affected their financial record. To date, they are still trying to fix that. So post-COVID, people are still struggling to get the things that they want to get in terms of debt with their spouses, because the other one is looking pretty bad in their financial records. So to avoid all of this, people then say, you know what, let's just get married out of community of property. So this is then why it's important to also protect the interests of your spouse when you have passed. That's why we actually did that video on Facebook to say, don't forget, you were protecting their interests when you were still alive. You guys had this joint vision of where you're going, even though you were married out of community of property. Don't forget that. Also prepare so that they are not affected when you have passed. You can imagine if you're the first one who dies, and you're the one who most of the properties were registered, under your name. That's not going to affect the other spouse in a positive manner. And often people think that because one person has properties registered in their own name, maybe the other one does not even help. Well, they possibly do, but it's just that for these reasons, often one person is able to acquire the property in their name, and it makes much more sense to do so. And then the last reason that I want us to talk about why people often opt to enter into a marriage out of community or property, which is positive on their part, is that they want to protect the interests of the families that they come from, right? Not their family, but the interests of their own family where they come from. Remember, we are still in a situation where a lot of the parents that we have don't want to draft wills. It's this thing of wills is still a big problem to them. They just say, no, people will just inherit what I have. But they don't know that this has some terrible implications, in a sense that if they die without a will and we inherit as the children and we are married, whatever shared inheritance we have, it starts forming part of the marriage if we are married in community of property. They don't think about that. And this often causes complications in the families where we come from. Because not only do I now have an entitlement to that property, but also my spouse also has an entitlement. And some people bring this up, when divorce comes about, and this often complicates things. Or even prior to divorce, it often complicates the whole situation. Hence, people will then say, you know what, let's just rather enter into a marriage out of community or property, because if you inherit from your family, that belongs to you and your family. I don't get involved. And also, if I inherit from my family, where people die without a will, there's not going to be complications of you having an involvement. It's just me and the family. This way, people then limit the amount of issues, that they could form part of. Because as we're speaking now, a lot of people are in such situations where there are people who have properties that they have inherited from their parents, but they're also married. They've also got another sister or a sibling that's also married, and it's a mess. It's a situation that cannot be resolved, right? And so to avoid such things and to have a bit of peace and maintain or protect the interests of each spouse's family, some spouses or prospective spouses will say, let us just do it out of community of property, because the old people at this point, they're not really comfortable with drafting wills. They feel some type of way about doing this. And so in the meantime, let's just make sure that at least this part of inheritance does not become an issue in the future. So don't forget, if you're someone who's married out of community or property, think about putting your affairs in order so that your spouse does not get negatively affected, and that the family that you were maintaining in your lifetime continues to be so even after you're not there, right? I hope this, guys, was helpful. I just pointed out a few things which are positive about getting into a marriage out of community of property, because I do see that there's this connotation that a marriage out of community of property has this negative aspect. Well, in most instances, I won't lie to you, the people that come and do this are people who are happy about it because they are looking at it from a positive outlook. All right, so that brings us to the end of our discussion today. Listen, like I said, or like we normally say, if you like this video, if you think it's going to be useful to another person, you like, you subscribe, you come back, because we'll share a lot of this content. We will see you next time.